Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. It's Friday. It means it's Q&A time. We've got an awesome panel assembled for you here, and we're getting ready to answer your questions. Bill Davis is our reader today. Bill, what's the first question? Bill? Nope, we might have lost Bill. I'll start reading the first question while Bill's getting figured out. First up's James Wickley from London, and James asks, does the panel know of a clicker or laser pointer that can highlight elements of a PowerPoint presentation on an LED screen? Need to sync laptops, but DSAN doesn't have a digital laser solution. Is it for? And this is for high-level medical professionals. Logitech, not an option. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, here's your problem. Because an LED screen reflects no light. So a laser pointer won't do any good because it'll just disappear when you point it at the screen on an emissive screen, because they're designed to reflect all ambient light because they're emissive. And usually they have even little black blinders around each LED, which really will absorb any kind of laser. So that's not going to work. You know, the only possible solution would be to maybe go with something like Air Mouse, which should be something like this, which then moves your mouse pointer on the screen. That would, or if you have, a telestrator, that would work too. This one has a keyboard on it and is wireless. You can get it at Walmart. They're kind of tricky because they use gyros to position themselves, to position it, and they can be a little tricky to get the hang of moving that device through the air to control the mouse on the screen. But I think that's going to be your only solution if you have to point out things that are on an LED screen.
Now, you mentioned that it's PowerPoint, and if you happen to have access to Keynote, now I don't know if this is going to be robust enough for your presentation, but if you have a Keynote that is playing off of a Mac, you can go into the Keynote remote app that's on your phone, and when you're on a slide, there's a looks like a little pencil icon in the upper right-hand corner when you're using Keynote remote. What that does is two things. Number one, it gives you 7 or 8 different colors where you can do the telestrator bit and draw on the screen. It also gives you a little laser pointer, and the little laser pointer does exactly what you think it is. Wherever you touch on your iPhone screen, on however big your screen is, a almost finger-sized, maybe half a finger-sized little laser will come up, and then you can start to circle stuff on the screen. It's kind of magical when it works. And that's where you have to understand what sort of network are you plugged into. If you are on if you're on a network, you may want to consider not having your phone or the computer connected to a Wi-Fi network, because then what'll happen is your computer and your phone will just create a little ad hoc connection, and then you don't have to worry about the connection from your phone having to traverse over a network infrastructure that you don't control to get up to your presentation. Now, all that said, you're still using a consumer level or, common folk level solution there. So I don't know if that's going to have the reliability that you need, but that could be an option if you're not going to go telestrator, which I can talk about, but I got to think about it a second. So Bill's going to answer.
Well, I had a kind of an add-on question. It's been interesting to me because sometimes, particularly in large venues, when I see people using laser pointers and trying to use them with certain screens, obviously the LEDs or something like that diffract things, and you can't use a laser pointer with some screens. But I always wondered if by using a laser pointer and the energy of that directed towards some of those pixel elements or LEDs, do you stand a chance of damaging that screen using laser pointers, or are they all low enough power not to be a concern?
Well, it depends. If you get the ones that are either green lasers or purple lasers, as you get further and further up into the higher wavelengths, those do have the potential to do damage to like camera sensors. But with the red ones, you're probably okay. But again, the issue comes down to reflection. Even on a television, we run into this in our office all the time because we phased out projectors. As soon as you get a 100-inch television for $2,000 or $3,000, it's like, well, that's what we would have spent on a projector to get a screen that was that large. But now I can have the lights on in the room. What a concept! Anybody that comes in that wants to use a laser pointer on the screen is sorely disappointed because now they can't circle stuff on the screen and that little superpower has been taken away, which brings me to the superpower. If if you are in control of the pipeline to the point where where it's your space, your auditorium, you could hook up some sort of solution where you could annotate or draw on the screen. And that would be where if you have, like, this is a Wacom tablet with a pen and a Telestrator app that's the Broadboard app that Alex and Wansi Robles developed over the years. That performs really well, but it's a much more complicated setup. And if you're just coming in as a guest presenter, you're probably not going to have the latitude to go and rewire their whole thing. So I would check that out. Next question.
Gary in Texas is up next, and Gary wonders, anyone have any luck with the generic no-name Stream Deck units?
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Well, no, I'm just saying I've never been really comfortable in any kind of production environment going with true no-name units. Usually these are units that somebody sees a market and says, oh, a lot of people are buying those things. Let's rush something into production that is similar to it, but we can make a bundle because everybody's looking for these. And I've just had so many problems every time I've decided to go with something new and unbranded. Eventually, the cream of the crop rises to the top, and you find companies like in the case of Stream Deck, Elgato kind of made that market, but then others have come out that have taken the time to research things, and you have real competition. But in the early days, and right now, if I think about it, I'm probably not going to be going down that path if I want my stuff to work all the time. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, it comes down to how much is your time worth? It's like, how much do you feel like hacking around for something versus actually going ahead and just having it work? And the it's just work factor, or it just works factor, is a thing when it comes to a Stream Deck, because it is pretty reliable. There is a community around it. And even if you do go the route where you're setting up a bunch of custom controls with Companion, which you could ostensibly do with a bunch of third-party tools, the reliability of being, like, even though I put Companion into my Stream Deck, I still use the native Stream Deck interface because I like some of their other buttons. I just picked up one of those XLs that has the 36 buttons on it, so I can try and replace my Stream Deck Zilla where I have 3 stacked on top of one another. And now that Elgato has come to their senses and brought the plugins back into the app where I don't have to go to a website and log in and then hit download and then go back and forth between my browser and the Stream Deck application, now I can just install the plugins directly from the app. It's gotten a lot better. They went through the wilderness for a little while. Chris?
CJ, I just registered streamzilla.global if you want to buy that URL from me. So here's the thing, Gary. Somebody mentioned superpower in the last question. Here's a superpower that you get when you've been doing this for a few decades. Most people buy 2 of everything. The first one they buy the one they could afford, and then eventually they buy the one that they really wanted. Save your money, hold off on the purchase, buy what you really want. Maybe it's not Stream Deck, because let's be honest, there was a day when Stream Deck was an unproven, unbranded, unrecognized thing. They just got good. And the new thing you think you want to buy, it may be the next Stream Deck. Just buy the one you want. If you can't buy it today, then wait until you can afford it. Save your money.
Next question.
Next one comes in to us from our friend Hasmak Ajar in Cape Town, South Africa. We are producing more podcasts, recording with the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro. Editors use Adobe Suite, After Effects, and feel like it takes way too long to produce the video. My previous manager used Final Cut and could complete projects in 2 days instead of 4. Suggestions?
I'm a little nervous. We've got a Final Cut heavy panel here. Chris?
Let's go. So Hasmak, fire the new guy, get the old guy back. I mean, here's the issue. Here's the issue. Producers, and I'm going to call you the producer right now, Hasmak, who understand the technology are super dangerous, because most people just say, I don't know anything. I need a video. And I'm assuming because you're shooting, you mentioned the 6K Pro, that your podcast, which traditionally was an audio-only thing with an RSS feed. What you mean is like a video show. So I'm assuming your video show, if it has to be edited, sounds like it does, you know enough about the technology that you can confront your production team and say, hey, you're too slow. Now, a lot of people who don't understand the workflow or the technology will just go, well, I guess it just takes 4 days for it to happen. I guess that's just what it is because that's what the smart guy sitting behind the computer said. You're spot on. Final Cut is much faster, in my opinion, and I think you need to either, like I said, get the old guy back or really lean heavy into this guy and say, the last guy was doing it in 2 days. I don't know. I know why you're taking so long, but I need you to do this faster. You need to figure this out. And, I'm going to make the official announcement here. I will be bringing back my Final Cut Grill show. It used to be a podcast. It's now going to be a video-only show. I'm going to try and not use the phrase podcast. But we're trying to bring that back, hence the purple background to match the new logo. And you could maybe have your – what's the guy using? Is he using Resolve or Premiere? Yeah,
Premiere
After Effects.
And After Effects.
He probably is not – if he's editing the whole thing in After Effects, he's a moron. He's just a moron. And if he has any doubt, you can give him my contact information. I'll explain to him what a moron he is. Just tell him he's got to use a better tool. After Effects is way too slow. At least use Premiere, and even that's a big mistake.
Bill?
This has been so fun to listen to. I'm going to surprise everybody by saying it's never the software, and it's really never the talent of the editor, and it's really, what it is, in my opinion, after all these years of editing? It's the mind meld between the person pushing the buttons and the tool, and them having enough flight hours so that everything goes away except their intent expressed through those tools onto something. I agree that Final Cut has a ton of things that can make a really good Final Cut editor super fast. It also has those same things that in the hands of somebody who doesn't know how to use all those speed improvement tools will get no speed improvement. And they'll go back to cutting like they cut with Premiere or Avid or anything else. And until they get the number of seat hours to make them fluid in it, they will not be any more efficient than anyone else. And this has just been proved to me over and over again in my life. Getting the tool is the start. Achieving mastery with the tool is having enough flight hours so that the stuff goes away from your thought process while you're doing the work. And that's, if you want people to be efficient, you just got to allow them enough time learning how to be efficient so that they can pay attention to what matters and not pay attention to where am I finding that button or menu or whatever, because that always kills efficiency. So I wish I had easier suggestions for you, Hasmukh. You can convert editors who used to work with Adobe stuff into Final Cut Editor, but it takes a lot of time and they will not be productive, not be super productive while they're making that stretch. And I'm going to say it's going to take at least half a year. And I say that because I've been using microphones my whole career. I noticed when I switched back to using this Neumann from the mics I was using before, on my voiceover stuff, it took me at least 6 months. Now, this is after a 50-year career of announcing to where I was using this mic properly. I understood the results I was getting. My delivery changed. I started understanding its nuances. And I think that's true of any complex work effort that you do as a creative artist. It just takes time.
And, Bill,
really good.
I'm not necessarily saying just jump the guy and delete his hard drive and then, put Final Cut on it. I mean, the guy's got to willingly go into the thing. Yeah. But, there are tools. The tool can be a difference. It absolutely can.
100%.
And you know
but
that.
It's that tool person mind meld. If you really are good at your tool, I mean, I think if you take a great piano player and put them in front of a Hammond B3 organ, they're not going to be a great Hammond B3 organist first. They do not understand the pedals. They don't understand the stops, and vice versa. If you take the organist and sit him in a piano, even though he knows how to play things, he or she is not going to get the nuances out of that instrument because they're just not conditioned to playing that instrument. And I think that's a rule that follows pretty universally in my experience.
Courtney?
And he's going to break your Hammond organ by trying to put tacks on the hammers. The other thing to consider is to simplify. And I'm not sure whether you're streaming this and then cutting it later, or whether you're live switching it as a podcast, or if you're just assembling individual pieces to create the podcast from scratch, and not, doing offline production where you're recording multiple takes of each piece, et cetera. After Effects is, as was mentioned earlier, is not the thing to edit in. After Effects is to create your, animated graphics in. And even that is overkill for just creating lower thirds. I'd say go to something simpler. Resolve, the cut page in Resolve would be pretty easy way to produce this stuff. Plus, it has the ability that if you are streaming anything live and recording ISO, you can record that little XML file that you can bring into Resolve and automatically then have your session all ready to go with multicam. Or if it's really simple, you could go to something like, and they're used to using the Adobe world, you could go to something like Adobe Express. Now, this is an online editor. It's free. You can download it, but you got to drag the problem is you got to drag and drop your video to upload it here to edit it. And it creates proxies, I guess, online that lets you edit. But you might try that. I haven't tried it, so I can't really speak of it. But it's a much simpler editor designed for just producing things like podcast and simple YouTube videos. So, something simpler might be better than diving into Final Cut or After Effects from a newbie.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor the point. We got to keep moving, but I do want to just quickly mention it. Regardless of the tool, the operator and the workflow are probably something that's slowing it down in here, and you just need to have a conversation about what are the constraints, what is taking a long time. Because if you have someone who's new that doesn't understand the ropes, and that's what you have available to you, then you're going to have to coach them into changing the way that they think about that workflow. And it's that, or you have to find a different editor. But regardless of what the tool is, if it's a tool that's built for the job, again, After Effects is not, known as a first-in-class video editor. That's its primary mission. But if you have the right tool for the job, then at some point people are going to get good at it. The question is, do you have the patience for somebody to be bad at it for long enough so that they can get good? It takes time. Next question.
Tommy Shantz in St. Paul, Minnesota says, what's the lowest latency I can get with a live multicam iMAG setup? I had originally was thinking of NDI, but it was clearly going down the wrong road. What is the right way to go?
Courtney.
SDI and Genlock. So make sure your cameras have a Genlock or a reference in. Create a house sync signal from a sync generator and feed it to all the cameras. And if all the cameras are in sync with each other, they'll be almost, really close to zero latency, less than 1 frame probably. And make sure your switcher is also locked to that same reference. And if everything's locked together, it doesn't have to do frame synchronization, which eats up 3 to 4 frames, so that your iMAG then will be pretty close. Digital, it depends on what you're using for the iMAG. The projector and or especially an LED screen can add an additional frame or 2 of latency. And also, if you have for iMAG, if you have big displays that are actually TVs, make sure they're set to game mode, because if they're set on any of the digital improve my looks or make it HDR or make it look nice and smooth and do frame interpolation, it's going to add additional latency. So if it has a game mode on it, put it in game mode, because that is the lowest latency of that particular display.
Chris.
Courtney, is it as much as 3 or 4 frames if you have to go through a frame synchronizer? Is it that much?
Depends on what frame rate it's at and how far out of sync they are, because each camera has its own oscillator in there and can be way behind. It can be a full frame behind, and it can take 3 fields to resynchronize, especially if it's interlace.
It was quite interesting when Apple released the new phone. I know you ran out and bought one right away. And the Blackmagic folks have the little adaptator thing that has the Genlock in. I found it fascinating to listen to online like influencer people. I'm going to just say people. I wanted to say something harsher, like an After Effects editor. Try to explain Genlock, like why that was important. But yes, Genlock is super important. I think we've gotten to the point where like the proliferation of like the Blackmagic self-syncing switchers are so ubiquitous that people think if I can plug the signal into it, then I can switch to it. And I dare you to go back, 20, 30, 40 years when none of that stuff existed and try and tech out a fly pack. It was a different world.
And Guy brings up in the chat, just as a reminder, NDI's got an encode and a decode, so that's obviously not the choice for iMAG, but it does bring up the thought about you have to consider your entire chain. Every single step, every single piece that you put into your video chain is going to create some sort of latency. So you want to, if the mission is iMAG, you want to have as few stops as possible on the way between those cameras and the and those screens on the other side.
You might want to go analog standard def. That'd be super fast.
640, 480 all the way. Next question.
Hazma Gajar in Cape Town is back with this one. With podcast recording, we set the two Blackmagic cameras, ISO, shutter, white balance, frame per second, almost the same. But in post-production, the editors would spend a great deal of time in color correction. What is the setup in pre-production to minimize work in post-production?
Bill.
Well, sadly, you can't always solve things in camera setup. And the reason I say this, I did a lot of convention work, and I would constantly get into circumstances where I had a main camera on the person at the podium, but my camera, either stage right or stage left side of the house, would be shooting and would have a different lighting circumstance. Maybe there were windows on the left side adding a blue cast that was in there. So you can only really depend on camera setup if everything is exactly the same for all the views, and you don't have the real world circumstance that people face constantly in things like football stadiums and things like that, where camera A is shooting in something lit by direct sunlight, but camera B is shooting into complete shadow. And they are never going to look the same, and that's why you have a shader back there matching things as well as you can. So there are some parts of the physics of this that just mean that color correction will almost always be necessary in anything other than an in-studio, completely locked off with the lighting set specifically to a set of standards. And that's why color correction exists. So that's my first thought on this.
Chris.
So, Hazmat, going back to this thing, I'm sorry you're having such a problem with this. So, sometimes it's just a workflow thing. We live in a sinful, imperfect world, and the cameras are probably never going to match. Like Bill said, just a slight difference in the angle of the lighting can change something. Shane Hurlbut, who's a director of photography and genius, he does camera setups before he goes out and does shoots where he'll spend a couple of days like matching like the tiniest details in the cameras. It's fascinating to watch the whole process. But in post, the way to do it, and I don't know how, well, here's what you want to do. You need to set up a multicam workflow. And whether you're doing that in After Effects, I still hope that was a typo, Premiere, Final Cut Pro, much smarter, or something else. You need to set up a workflow where you can make an adjustment on camera A and have that adjustment flow through your entire timeline. If you're doing things on a clip by clip, edit by edit, cut to camera 2, readjust the color, cut back to camera 1, readjust the color. You've got to be able to do it in a workflow where it flows all the way through. In Final Cut, my area of expertise, you inside the multicam clip, you can toggle back and forth between the two angles and diddle fiddle, and then walk away from it on Monday morning and then go cut the show. And if through the process of cutting the show, you realize, you know what, camera 2 is a little bit more plus yellow, I can go back into that file. I just Bobby Brady'd on you there. You can go back into that Final Cut clip, take out a little of the yellow on that camera 2, and that change ripples through your entire timeline that you just did. And if your editor can't do that, he needs training.
Similar thought as Chris is saying, if you were in Resolve for whatever reason doing the color correction, they have this concept of group grading, where if you bring in each clip individually and you just cut them, sometimes Resolve will just recognize that if you're cutting the whole thing in Resolve, it'll understand that the source footage is the same for all of these cuts throughout the timeline, and then you make a change on one and it'll make them on all. If Resolve doesn't know that all the clips are related because you're round tripping for some reason or you're coming from another editor, you just highlight every other clip, make it a group grade, and then you adjust the group node and then adjust everywhere else. One of the things that you might that also could be throwing you off, Hosmic, is that if you have different glass on one camera versus the other, the lens has the ability to introduce some color artifact or some color shifts or casts into the shot. So one way to do it is to shoot a color card, get a DSC like the Chroma or the I have one of those little video passports from Calibrite, or they have the Color Checker 24. Shoot that in whatever you're recording and make sure all the settings are the same on both cameras. Shoot it in the log, and then you just select, here's my input gamma, here's my output gamma, here's my input color space, here's my output color space. A little grid comes up, you match, make sure you're selecting the right card. You match the card in the computer, the little boxes with the card on the screen, and then you hit. And then that'll it's not going to be a perfectly graded shot, but it will get you to at least an even between the two, and then you have a good starting point. Chris?
I'd also say, Hosmic, we know you. We know what attention to detail you have. It's very possible that you are hyper-analyzing things. I'll tell you, some of the best shows, I'm trying to not use the word podcast, take like Diary of the CEO, was it Steve Bartlett? Mm-hmm. Sean Ryan, some of the really big shows, you look at them, and if you look at them super critical, you go, yeah, that's not right. From the wide shot to the close up, it's not right. So sometimes with our own work, we get, I'm just going to say, we might get too critical, and it may not be anywhere near as bad as you think it is. Yes, we should try to make it better, but definitely a lot of it gets solved with better workflow.
And if the content is compelling, and if the audio is solid, your video is going to look better. A lot of people don't think that way. But if the audio is poor, people will turn it off no matter how good it looks. You
know what they say, right, CJ?
Audio is half than video, and they're lying.
Television,
more than half.
Television without pictures is radio, and television without sound is technical difficulties.
Bill?
I just want to support what CJ was saying there at the end. You really have lost already if anybody watching your show is debating the color correction. The content should be compelling enough so that small technical problems are not the issue. And I go back to the Rodley King video because I happened to be around during that time. And, before that, we only heard you can't put VHS on television. VHS is not good enough to be on television. Nobody should and every engineer I know would just laugh at anybody trying to put a VHS signal on television until they needed to. And suddenly that dam broke, and it was understanding that the social content was way more important to the public good and discussion than the technical quality. And I think we forget that at our own risk.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. I'd like to upgrade my unmanaged switches at my house of worship. From the current 4-letter word they are, laughing out loud, I need to handle Dante NDI traffic for our production network and feed our APs. Thoughts?
Tom?
Wow, what a big ask. Unmanaged versus managed switches won't just do the trick. You need to build up your network from the beginning. A good router, yes, you do need some managed layer 2 switches, but layer 3 switches are necessary in certain areas, especially with Dante and NDI, because you need to know how to build up those VLANs, virtual LANs, within your network and make sure that there is as little traffic on each segment as possible so that you get the best performance out of all of those. So start with a good brand. I like Ubiquiti and Unify. Go from there. You'll get yourself a good network guy who can design a network from the ground up.
The other thing that you need to think about is think about your constraints. A lot of this is a math problem. How much bandwidth are you going to require for your NDI VLAN? How much bandwidth are you going to require for your audio? How much bandwidth is your AP or your APs going to drive? And then make sure that the backplane of that switch has enough oomph plus some headroom so that all of that traffic can flow back and forth. Obviously, having a managed switch that can do all the technical things is important, that Tom is saying, but don't think that every managed switch is created equally. You have to think about how much traffic is trying to flow through that pipe. Mickey in the chat mentions a Cisco or Arista, and Zach's been eyeing some Cisco products. And then for the cost, Ryan Thompson says you may even be able to get away with Netgear. Next question.
Next one comes from Robert Linkram in Belmont Shores, California. My MacMini M4 detects my ATEM Extreme, but will not connect. I've swapped the 5 megabits USB-C 3 cables with known good cables. It'll only connect once after uninstalling the current Blackmagic design software and reinstalling the software. Same thing happened on the Constellation. Help?
What I would think about is is there anything else on that bus that's causing it to be constrained? Are you looking at front ports or back ports on the Mac Mini? The back ports are going to give you a little bit more bandwidth. The other thing to think about is if you're using the ATEM or you're using the Constellation on other machines, did somehow the software version on the switcher get upgraded and your one on your Mac is not? Maybe that's why after the reinstall it's happening. But if you're having to uninstall and reinstall multiple times, you might have something else going on there, Guy.
Yeah, you might want to check back and see what firmwares were installed along the way and see if you might have skipped one where you have to go back and install one because they're out of sync now. Your software is too new. So there's previous versions where it says when you plug in the switcher, this needs to be hardware upgraded. So that's one thing to take a look at. But the easiest one right out the gate is just to try to set up a static IP in the ATEM setup. So instead of protocol being DHCP, try setting up a static. If you can look at your Mac that's on the network, make sure that you're not using something that's already, you're not going to step on something else. But in this case, mine's set to 192.168.8.237, and then this Mac is on that same network, and then see if the two will connect. But I'm wondering if it's just you're out of sync where you're trying to download one of the latest. In the support section of the Blackmagic site, you can go back a couple. So if you know it's not been upgraded in like 2 years or something, you might have to go back and go back a year or so and try that one instead of the latest version.
And Guy kind of brushed up against another point, is if you're trying to use USB just for control as opposed to getting the camera output, can you see it over the network? And I think John Wallace said that in the chat. Does it detect over the network? Robert says, no, it's only connected via USB-C. So at least it's not an IP address problem. The other thing you might want to check, though, is there any sort of thing on the Mac that is saying, I can't connect to this USB, like you hit the wrong button on the pop-up when it came up on the Mac. Make sure that there's not anything in your privacy and security settings that might be limiting that. And the other thing that you might want to do is after you uninstall the Blackmagic software, make sure that it did the cleanup. If you go into the library in the Mac and you go into the library for your user and the library for the whole computer, and you go into application support, and then you find the Blackmagic design, and then you go into library preferences, and you get the com.blackmagicdesign. Whatever. All of those are things that you want to make sure when you uninstall it, really, really uninstall it. And then that might help deal with a mismatch if there's a stale preference file in there that's causing some sort of thing going on. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. I have some cheap Rode USB mic stands that break easily, but found more stronger clips that will work. Are there better options than this for an NT USB Plus Revolution preamp?
Courtney.
Well, that mic is a round type condenser, and looking at the shock mount, it's kind of got an offset, a little ring that goes around the bottom and goes to an offset 1/4-20, which looks to me like it's going to transmit a lot of. Anytime you touch your desk, it's going to go boom, 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 because it's going to transmit any contact sounds into the mic diaphragm, which is a problem. I'd say measure the diameter and look for something like a spider mount, like something like this one that you can get from Behringer for, I think they're around $27. $27.64. Just make sure it will fit the diameter of that microphone. That way it'll suspend it and also gives you a free pop filter in there to filter out those pops for the one that it comes with may not be doing an adequate job. So I'd say go with that. And these will mount on a 1/4-20 head as well. So, and also if it depends on what's breaking, are the 3 little plastic legs that come with that mount breaking, or is it something else? I'd suggest putting it on a floor stand so it's not attached to your desk, so it's suspended directly so that when you're typing on the keyboard or setting your coffee cup down, it doesn't go directly into the microphone.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. And Andy wonders thoughts on the Sony Monitor and Control app. And he's got a link to a News Shooter article on it.
Bill.
You might have heard a lot of rattling, and I apologize for that, but I was trying to set it up so I could show you monitor and control, because since I moved to a Sony camera, so there is my monitor and control interface. There are things that I like about it a lot and things that I don't like about it a lot. For me, the biggest downside to it is that it wants to connect via both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth at the beginning of every session I do, and it takes a while to initialize that. Now, it has a lot of pluses. There are a lot of different possibilities here. You can set focus points and switch ISO and things like that on the fly. So there's a lot of robust controls here that you can get into, and it's very useful. But I do wish it had some sort of hardwired control interface rather than relying on having to do wireless connection every time I decide to go in and operate this. I'm having to re-log in. It takes maybe 30 seconds for all those wireless controls to link up, but I'm still not as comfortable with that as I am with something that is wired into my system and I know it works every time. But it's they have both this and there's another piece of software that comes with it that allows you to work inside the Sony ecosystem. So if you're using Sony editing equipment and this, you'll get more capabilities than if you're like me using different editing software but just want this to control a camera. Has a lot of things you can do with it, no question about that, and it's pretty well designed, but it's also a little, in my opinion, it feels a little fiddly with that initial connection thing. So those are my 2 cents.
I have a slightly different experience with the app than Bill was having. And I'm not sure if, Bill, you're trying to use the ad hoc Wi-Fi connection or if your camera is connecting to your home network. I have it set up the latter way in that I have it on, and again, because it's in my home, it's easy to do this. If you're moving all the time, it's a little bit different. But in the house, it connects to the Wi-Fi, and because the monitor and control app, as far as I can tell, it's an iPad app that they kind of moved over to the Mac because a lot of the controls seem to be touch-friendly. So when you're using it, you have to keep that in mind, like the touch targets. As I'm moving this histogram around, it doesn't feel like a Mac app. But that said, this tools menu that's up here is awesome because you can customize your screen, and each one of these individual, whether it's the focus map or the false color or the histogram, you can control exactly how that stuff's going to show up, which I find very nice when I'm trying to balance this camera and go through the whole system. Having in the camera's version of what it sees be my starting point is really great. The other thing that I have is up here on the Mac, sorry, I've got to see where this part of the screen is. Down here, there's a little button that says what LUT you're in. And this is huge because if you're trying to balance this camera, one of the things that we always say about Sony cameras is that, it's not as controllable for my ATEM as all the Blackmagic cameras were. And so what you can do is in Resolve, you can go in here, shoot your color card, do whatever you're going to do, make your LUT and tweak it. And then I can click on here, go into my LUT files and everything that I've ever tried. And then if I hit this little gear icon, I can hit import and then just go into my computer, find the LUT file that I just made, and boom. Now it's on. That is so much faster than when you were had to load it onto an SD card and walk back around the camera and hit a bunch of buttons to import. It's so fluid that it makes your getting this camera exactly how you want it to look so much nicer. Bill?
Well, I just wanted to go back in and thank you, CJ, because CJ was incredibly nice to me. When I first got this camera, he spent, I think, 3 sessions or 4 sessions with me trying to walk through it. And I'll say that's also something to think about. If you are technical and if you like granularity and like to be able to control thousands of things, this is another one of those great apps where you will be incredibly happy. If you're the kind of casual user who wants like 4 menu things you can change to get it kind of where you want and leave it at that, this will not make you happy because we were digging down quite a ways in my initial setup. I don't begrudge that, but just understand that software is made sometimes for different levels, and this is pretty technically complex if you want to drill down. If you want something you can quickly set up, save, and you can save and then come back to it, but sometimes drilling down to make small adjustments can be a bit of a challenge. That's all I'll say.
And one more thing, if your last experience with Sony Control Remotely was the Imaging Edge Control app or Imaging IEM, whatever it was, and this is not that. This is like a revelation if you were used to the older Sony software. So the ZV-E10-2 and then the FX3, FX30 go on this one, and it's super nice. Next question.
Next one comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Is the Shure MV7 Plus better managed via direct USB-C connection or via XLR to the Rodecaster video?
Courtney.
Well, I don't have one of them Sony MV7 Pluses, but I do have the Rodecaster video. You know, one problem I think you're getting into with the MV7 Plus, if you're using it with a USB interface, Paul, is the little touch panel that's on the top of this that controls your level. This touch panel and LED that's on top. I think if you're grabbing that microphone to reposition it, you may be changing the level. So that's just a guess, but that's a possibility. And if you use the XLR out and go to the Rodecaster software, then here, let's look at the Rodecaster software. Then you can do a lot of adjustments in the software itself for that Rodecaster video. Here's my microphone. Not that I would ever use any of these, but you do have the AFX. The full AFX control with all the processing, if you need it or want it, to give you that, all of these strange processing things called brilliance and sparkle and whoop-de-doo and magic fairy dust add. So, they give it funny names, or you can actually go to the advanced mode over here and see the actual, what you actually are controlling with compression and expansion and echo and delay and all of that other good stuff. So you have a lot of control over it. And you don't have to worry about touching the mic and changing the level of the microphone itself. And that preamp, the preamps that are built into the Rodecaster video are high enough gain to deal with that dynamic microphone of the MV7 that comes out of the XLR connector, if it is.
And generally, the office hours, the ethos is to do as little processing to that microphone as possible, that you want that natural sound so that it sounds more authentic, it sounds more human. If you are going to use processing because you're dealing with an imperfect environment or a challenging situation, find what sounds good. If it sounds better to you using the digital, the DSP that's in the microphone, then you're going to have to use USB-C, because all of the things that you're doing in Motive Mix are not going to translate over when that's plugged in over XLR. If the processing that you're having to put on that microphone, again, because of your environment, sounds better on what's coming out of the Rode, then you're going to go with the XLR more towards on the XLR side, because you have a more stable connection from the microphone into your video, and you're not trying to marry kind of two different systems together. Also, your level of control of being able to interface with that Rode application, I think, is a little bit nicer than digging into the Shure menu. I just find that a little clumsy, but that's just me. That's the great part about the MV7 Plus, though, is that you can do it both ways. So when you have the Rode, you can have it in that system. If you're on the Rode, you can plug it in USB-C. That's ROAD for those who are following along at home. Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois is up with this one. I understand Motionvfx, provider of Davinci Resolve Plugins, has been purchased by Apple. Any backstory here to understand? Is it's a good acquisition for Davinci users?
Chris.
So, Kenny, you might be the only person on this little blue dot in space that refers to Motionvfx as a provider of Davinci plugins. I think Motionvfx was providing plugins and templates and whatnot for Final Cut, I think for maybe like a decade before Resolve was ever even considered an editing platform. Apple bought Motionvfx for its intellectual property, its R&D, its people. Simon, before he sold the company, really built a really terrific team of people there. I'd also like to point out, a little story about the birth of the Final Cut that we know now. Apple bought Randy Ubilis's team and his code when Randy was developing an application called Key Grip at Macromedia in the mid-90s. And when Apple bought Key Grip and then renamed it Final Cut, Randy Ubilis and his team had been developing a cross-platform edit application, both for Final Cut and for Windows. And legend has it that Windows code got immediately locked up in a vault. So it is not beyond Apple historically to Deep Six development that was making the competition better. So I think it's probably pretty safe to say that Apple buying Motionvfx is the exact opposite of a good acquisition for Davinci users. I can't imagine them continuing to develop for Davinci. And I think the only reason for the last 5 years that they were doing after Simon sold the company, because Simon had told me privately, he goes, I got to tell you, developing these plugins and stuff for other applications is way harder than developing for Apple. But I think the only reason why they did push so deep into developing for Premiere and Resolve was that the company had been bought by an investment firm, and they probably wanted to make the company look better on the balance sheets. Like, oh, look, we're not just Final Cut, we do everything to help it sell. Apple didn't care about those other things, but I think Apple bought it because they're going to take that premium content and fold it into the subscription model that they're now doing with the Final Cut and the Creator Studio.
Bill?
So the other thing to think about is that we just had a little kerfluffle in the computer industry with Apple coming out with an extremely low-priced, comparatively, laptop. So why did they do that? And some of the reasons that are preferred out there is that they really wanted to take another shot at education and the low end of the market. And so if they're building an infrastructure where they're attracting new creatives with very low-priced hardware in that class, the idea of expanding content that can be run on those low-priced machines and building out the ecosystem starts sounding to me like a very smart long-range play. If you have things like this library available, and if eventually, we don't know this is going to happen, and I'm imagining, but let's say they decide, what the heck, we're rich enough already, we're just going to wrap this in. And Motionvfx, all those templates, all that beautiful, gorgeous content can suddenly be used by students in their $500 laptops, they have a chance to capture the imagination of a whole new generation of users. And I think that kind of strategic thinking is something that Apple tends to do pretty well. So just take that for what it's worth.
Chris.
Yeah, a lot of people, Bill, will say that the Neo doesn't have the guts to do like video editing because it's such an inexpensive computer. But I've been watching a whole bunch of videos about it and doing like basic editing in Final Cut. And actually, they say it works quite well. But you bring up a really good point that, you know, some of the Motionvfx stuff is just templates, but some of their stuff, like their motion tracking and stuff, it's very intensive stuff. So maybe there is a division of like content and premium content or content and filters. But I think the thing that I really would love to see is for Apple to say, yep, we just bought the premium in the promise of premium content. And it was an investment. Who knows how much? I'd love to know how much they spent. I don't think we'll ever find out, but I don't know, public company, maybe it has to be disclosed. I don't know. But I'd love to know what they spent on it. Also, another thing that I've heard a lot of people talking about is, well, to work for Apple, you have to move to Cupertino. But, you know, years ago, Apple bought the Logic team, and I think they're still based out of Germany. So it's very possible that Simon's old team and, you know, all the people that have been hired in the last 5 years, whatever, that they could stay in Poland and continue to work. They clearly are putting something good in the water there because they really do fantastic work.
I'm going to take a slight sidetrack and bounce off of something that Chris and Bill touched on, and that is I believe that children should learn how to be creative on anemic hardware because constraints force creativity. You have to think about how you're doing something and what's the right way to do it and what's the efficient way to do it, and you get a lot better at something. Like I used to edit videos on like on a 8-year-old hand-me-down computer, and things took forever. And so I had to think really hard about how I did them. And it's a powerful sentiment. And I know that it's a little topic, but it needs to be that people who are learning, if you have the time, do it on stuff that isn't the heavy iron because it makes you appreciate the good stuff when you get it. Bill?
To CJ's point, I read a brilliant article, and I'm going to try to find a link to it and toss it in all the chats, from somebody who was making exactly that point. This was a longtime professional in the industry, and he wrote this lovely opinion piece about how constraints, when he was growing up, caused him to think of new ways to get things done. Having the biggest, best machine on your desk when you're learning something is not always an advantage. And he really talked about it passionately about when he was a teenager, having to learn to think around and work around resource constraints made him so much stronger for the whole rest of his career. It was one of those things that I read and I said, I can see myself in this. This is me on my 128 Mac that I first got that barely can run 3 programs, and I learned how to think around all those limitations, and I think it can be really important. So my sneaking suspicion, he was talking about this new machine from Apple, and about everybody saying, well, it doesn't do this, doesn't do that, doesn't do this, and he was going, great, it doesn't do that, so the kids will have to figure out how to work around it, and that's going to make them stronger in terms of their mental rigidity and just power, because they're going to have to think around problems. It's not just going to be handed to them. They gotta code it. They gotta make it efficient. They've got to do great work with less resources. And there's something about that really struck me. If I can find it, I'll post the link to that article. It's really well written.
Hey, if you're finding office hours valuable, there are a couple ways that you can help us out. You can like and subscribe to YouTube. We've got volunteer opportunities and panelist opportunities, but also think about what kind of value did you get out of office hours? Did we solve a problem for you? Did we help you not make a bad purchase? Did we just make you think about anemic hardware for the future of humanity? Think about some of that value that you got and consider giving some of it back because we are volunteer funded, volunteer supported, and every little bit helps. And we want to keep doing this every single day for you. So officehours.global/donate if you want to give some of that value for value. Next question.
Next question comes to us in the listing from Pedro G. Gonzalez in Jacksonville, Florida. We know Office Hours loves Dante for audio, but what are your thoughts on Dante for video?
Guy?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to get one of the world's first Dante AV cameras, and when I plugged it in, they had not yet come out with the software that would allow you to ingest it into a vMix. So I think the reason why it hasn't gotten adopted in this community is one, that where you are trying to get a software switcher to accept this format, and when you do, you have to pay the $25 to get it, and then when you go to their website to go and get, it's called Dante Studio, you'll notice that there is a white paper that says, hey, Dante Studio presents itself as a virtual webcam. So when you present something as a virtual webcam, you lose some of the benefit of the whole Dante AV Ultra color space. So one of the reasons why people pitch this as something for like a conference room or an LED wall is because you can get 444 color, high bandwidth, 1 gigabit with HDR. So if you need to do an LED wall, you use the higher end codec and then you use pure hardware. So I think that a lot of people haven't adopted this because just the AJA decoder is like $1,800. So you would, and that's just a one-to-one relationship. So for every device, your sender and your receiver has to be in that format. So I don't know if it's going to get as entrenched as NDI is, because even though NDI is only moving at 300 megabit as opposed on 4K, you can get better color out of these better tools. But then there's SDI, or excuse me, there's 2110, and that seems to be getting more widely adopted than Dante AV.
Next question.
Hasmik Gajar in Cape Town, South Africa is back with this one. I need a third Blackmagic camera. Desire autofocus. Is there a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro? Oh, there is the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro and the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K. Price difference is $66 for him in his market. Which one should I get and why, since I have currently 2 of the Pocket Cinema cameras?
Yeah, I'm with Mickey on this one. If you already have 2 cameras that are like one of the ones that you're thinking about buying, I encourage you to get a third, because not only does it help you understand your workflow, it also helps all of your operators. And the biggest thing between these two is, I think the Pocket Cinema camera is the Super 35. The other one's a full frame. So your lens choices, all of the things that everybody thinks they know really well, all of a sudden are going to go into question if they're not used to managing different sensor sizes on cameras. But also, just for the sake of simplicity of workflow, of being able to interchange parts between all the 3 of them, I would suggest sticking with the one that brought you, just because it makes life simpler. Next question.
Next one's coming from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Do you have any suggestions for a roundtable podcast setup using an ATEM Mini and a Rodecaster video? Cameras, lighting, audio, table, backdrop, and so forth.
Courtney.
Yeah, don't do it. Yeah. There's a couple of problems with your collection there as an ATEM Mini and a Rodecaster video, because you're probably going to have to, both of them have 4 inputs, basically. So if you want more than 3 cameras, that could be a problem. I would use them cascading, and I would use the ATEM Mini on the downstream side. So I'd use the Rodecaster video on the upstream side and feed the output of the Rodecaster video into the ATEM Mini, and then use the ATEM Mini for overlays or little bugs in the corner, or for streaming. If you want to connect it to your stream, let it do the streaming. Because a couple of things, the Rodecaster video can auto switch. If you want to have it do video follows audio, you can set it up so that it will detect the inputs from the different microphones and switch automatically to the camera associated with that microphone. So that can save you a lot of trouble. As far as lighting goes, I wouldn't put the people completely in the round. I'd do a semicircle rather than, half a circle. Cheap way to do lighting would be to put a China ball, a pretty good diameter one, maybe 1.5 to 2 foot diameter China ball in the middle of above the middle of the table, and put a black duvetine skirt around it so that the light hits the people, but the cameras that are further out are behind the little skirt that's hanging down, so you don't get lens flare into your cameras from that China ball. That'll give you a nice even light on the faces of everybody seated around the without getting around the table, without getting too complex, I'd go with a plain black curtains behind them. That way it's easier if you have to hide a tripod that a camera's on that happens to get in the edge of some shot shooting in the semicircle or the round. It's easy to cover them up with duvetine and just have the lens peeking out so that you can hide your cameraman and or tripods or stands that the cameras are on. So black is usually your friend. Trying to have a detailed background behind them is going to be difficult if you're shooting in the round, because then your studio has to be in the round. And where are you going to hide the cameras and microphones unless you've got them, above the frame on PTZs or something, then that gets complex. Trying to hide the cameras in the round is one of your biggest problems. Audio, it'll sound better if you have, good directional microphones like mini shotguns positioned just out of frame above each person. But, if you don't want to do that, then lavaliers on each person and then have the auto switching hooked up to each one of those lavaliers to automatically switch for you.
I just have this commercial in my head now that somebody needs to make with Sora or Nano Banana Video or something that's just Courtney as a little kid just with a piece of black fabric says, "More duvetine, please." Hey, thanks, everybody. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you to our panelists for putting on such a wonderful sharing of knowledge. There's no one of us that's as smart as all of us together, and we showed up this morning to bring it. Chris's grill. I love the purple background. Also, thank you to the chat. There's a lot of great stuff going on in the chat as far as even more answers, more opinions. If you're not there, check that out at officehours.global/join. We thank our producers for asking those great questions all show long and voting them up and down. Also, thank you to our wonderful back-end crew for getting us in, keeping us looking and sounding good, keeping us organized and moving forward, even as some members of the community get busy and life kind of pulls at them. Somebody else steps up and gets in there, and it's pretty incredible. So thank you so much to our back-end crew. The telemetry reversal today, had we gone out in person and asked all these questions, would have been to 67,000 miles. That's 109,000 kilometers, 534 million bananas for scale. See you in after hours.
I popped that link in the chat, too, for anybody who's interested. Lovely little story.
Oh, nice.
Pop it in the event chat so the real folks can see it. Not just us.
No, he
Didn't I just do that? Oh,
no, yeah, you did. Bill.
Panel chat.
He did both.
Oh, did you?
Covering the bases. Yeah, I'm sorry about that, guys.
Sorry, I didn't scroll down all the way.
I don't know what, for some reason in the middle of the show, my CPU went nuts. I don't have anything else running on this machine. I need to restart.
You did get a little stuttery there at some point.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was me. I was like, what?
Very sorry.
Where's that coming from?
At least your IFB didn't go away for the start of the show.
That's what happened to Bill.
Good job, CJ,
Are you listening?
realizing it.
Bill.
We're like,
all good.
Bill, you're the reader. Go, Bill, go.
They're waiting a long time to start the show today. It's completely silent. What's going on?